Again, I welcome everyone today as we lift up God's love for us and compassion in celebrating again a very long-standing ministry here, Arm in Arm in Africa. Many members of this parish, close to 300, have been on delegations over the last 23 years. Members of the parish have stepped up in leadership. We welcome T. Michael this morning, a member of the board of Arm in Arm in Africa, providing us an incredible opening song. This morning it's my pleasure and my honor to introduce Ed Luterbach, a member of our parish, also is on the board of Arm in Arm in Africa, and will talk about his experiences in South Africa. Let's give Ed a warm welcome.
Guess what I found in Father Cassidy's closet? Don't tell him. Good morning, St. Joan of Arc. It's great to be back to support Father Cassidy, the Arm in Arm in Africa Board of Directors, and our cousins in South Africa on our 23rd Arm in Arm in Africa Sunday. Last year on Arm in Arm in Africa Sunday, I talked about how I got involved by taking my first trip to South Africa in 2015. How I was overwhelmed by how much joy I saw from people that had so little. I went back this past February, and I'm happy to report that even with the hardships of COVID and sustained unemployment, the joy is still there. So I'd like to share two highlights of my trip. On my first trip to South Africa back in 2015, I met a young woman named Zinzi. Her mom and dad had both died. She was an orphan taking care of her younger sister. She benefited from the food, health care, and education programs that Arm in Arm in Africa provided in Cape Town. To show her appreciation, she offered to take me and a few others on a home visit in the area. During one of the discussions, she shared with me some of the challenges that she had in her life, but she also shared with me that she had a goal to one day become an accountant. This was not a typical goal for anyone, but I encouraged her to try and achieve it. Fast forward 8 years later to 2023, we went to J.L. Zwane Church as part of our delegation visit, and there was Zinzi. She was still volunteering. Better yet, Zinzi was working as an accountant for a small company with a few classes left to get her degree. Now this is an amazing story in and of itself, but keep in mind that the pandemic hit South Africa harder than most countries. Keep in mind that youth unemployment had been steady at 60%. Keep in mind that due to a culture where young girls don't believe they have the opportunity to say no, 1 out of 4 girls become pregnant as a teenager. The odds were against her, but Zinzi stuck to her goal. The story was so compelling that we invited Zinzi to the U.S. to share her successes at our summer event. It was her first trip out of South Africa, and those that were there knew that she did an amazing job telling her life story. But I'm here to tell you that her story gets better. After her talk, an anonymous donor offered to pay for the rest of her classes. And the story gets even better. Based on her familiarity with the programs of Arm in Arm in Africa, I would like to announce that Zinzi is the newest member of our board of directors for Arm in Africa. She's serving on the finance committee, and she is a perfect fit for our organizational development goals, as we need to have more members on our board representing South Africans. I love sharing this story, but Zinzi's path is the exception to the rule of the reality of life in South Africa. As I mentioned before, unemployment remains one of the biggest challenges in the country. The official unemployment rate is 33%. If you add the people that stopped looking for work, it's 42%. And youth unemployment is a staggering 64% today. You couple that with double-digit food inflation, it's very, very difficult for families to make ends meet. And this is the segue to my second highlight of my trip. As you may know, Arm in Africa leads an annual delegation to South Africa. This gives us an ability to understand the needs of the community at a local level and focus our resources on things that would have the biggest impact, like wheelbarrows, community gardens, are good examples of things that we've done. But there's a new program that is supporting the community that's truly inspiring. With unemployment so high, the community needs to reskill parents that were unable to provide for their families. For the program to be successful, we thought we should focus on the women of South Africa. Not only because the population of unwed mothers is so high, but in South Africa, like most countries around the world, it's the women that know how to get things done. Utilizing the space from one of our youth education programs, we set up a classroom to train women to become plumbers. This idea evolved at a local level. But as soon as we heard about it, we loved it because it broke down the stereotypes and supports an unmet need in the community. The first class was offered to 30 women that signed up for a 13-week program. They met on Saturdays. Each class was 6 hours long, and we provided instructions and a meal. Participants were given hands-on classroom training and some basic business skills. When they graduated, the women divided themselves into 6 groups. This was able to help them form small businesses. Arm in Africa provided 6 sets of plumbers' toolkits for them to share to complete their jobs in the community. This program hits the mark on so many levels. It creates jobs. It builds an entrepreneurial spirit. It fills the gap of the shortage of plumbers. It empowers women. And finally, this program provides a training model for other vocations and skill sets that are needed in the townships. We're already discussing other adult education needs, like training electricians or agricultural science to support the growth of community gardens. In an effort to support these initiatives, we have 2 of our board members that serve on the Education Committee are traveling with the 2024 delegation. Learning more about this program was absolutely one of the highlights of our 2023 delegation. Arm in Africa provides food, healthcare, and education, and we couldn't do any of it without all of you. We're coming up on our 24th delegation in South Africa in February, and the need is still there. And I know some of you might be thinking, why should I help those people when we have so many people in need in the U.S.? And the answer is simple. If not us, then who? Who will help these people that has the largest income gap of any country in the world? This is a country where 10% of the people have 85% of the household wealth. So if not us, then who? So here is what we need. First, we need you to continue giving annually at the same rate that you'd been giving for the last 23 years. That will make sure we don't lose any of our recurring program dollars. Our goal this year is $197,000, which starts October 1st to December 31st, so Q4. This is exactly what our contributions were last year, so we know this goal is achievable. Second, we'd like you to consider including Arm in Africa in your estate plan or memorials. This is a great way to honor a loved one by providing life-saving support at an end-of-life event. Finally, if you are fortunate enough to have a little extra money to give, we'd like you to consider giving to Arm in Africa's endowment. Think of an endowment like a savings account. Arm in Africa will get to use the interest on that account for programming dollars. But this is a gift that keeps on giving because we can't touch the principal you give, only the interest it generates annually. So thank you for your continued support of Arm in Africa, and I'd like to turn it back to Father Cassidy for a few comments.
Thank you, Ed. I want to just add a few comments as we gather again to celebrate this relationship. No Arm in Africa weekend would be complete without my expressing how incredibly nervous I get about it. When I hear the goal, it takes my breath away. We meet those goals. It's always a little nerve-wracking for me. My friend Paula Larson, sitting over here, who's on our board, her response to me every time I express that I'm nervous, she says about Arm in Africa weekend, she will always say, "Jim, you're always nervous about Arm in Africa weekend." So with that said, it's understandable because for those of us in particular who have been there, we know these people and we know what their needs are, and it's very close to us, and a lot rides on our being able to meet the goal. No Arm in Africa weekend would be complete without an acknowledgement of Nelson Mandela. As you well know, the South African black nationalist who spent 27 years in prison for fighting against the country's discriminatory apartheid system of racial segregation. In a phrase, what its intent was to reduce every black person to only count as 4/5 of a human being, and then to use scripture as a way to back that up, to be legally reduced to being 4/5 of a person. Mandela was born in 1918 and elected president of South Africa in 1994. Having had the privilege of actually meeting Nelson Mandela in 2001, right here in Minneapolis at an NAACP fundraiser. Having met him in 2001, it was just hardly 1 year after we had made our very first journey to South Africa. Having completed that in 2000, knowing that Nelson Mandela was going to be right here in the City of Lakes, you darn right I'm going to be meeting Nelson Mandela, and had that opportunity. In his words, I share this quote: "A fundamental concern for others in our individual and community lives would go a long way in making the world the better place that we so passionately dream of. To have truly a long-standing, authentic concern for one another. And it would seem to me that that is missing on so many levels in our nation, in our church, and in our world. Arm in Africa, the now 23-year-old vision and dream continues to open new pathways to the future. Speaking of the future, it has been said that a picture is worth 1,000 words. This photograph is worth 1,000 words. This is Minsili, which translates to mean happiness. I had the opportunity to meet Minsili last year in the village of Melangeni during a food distribution. She is the second born to a young mom of 19 years old. And in their hut, there are always 8 family members living, and that frequently goes to 12 and above, depending on circumstances and depending on who has food. Minsili and her family participate in our food distribution program. This child could easily be within the 5th generation, born since the political system of apartheid governed every aspect of life in South Africa from 1948 to 1991. So even though it officially ended in 91, the waves of hatred from apartheid continue to take a toll. This young Minsili continues to experience the downside of apartheid. Arm in Africa makes a difference. There remains a painful, lingering effect on the daily lives of so many still living in poverty 5 generations later. All the more reason to nurture that fundamental concern for others that Mandela felt would go a long way for a world of justice, a world that we so passionately need, a world that we so often dream of, despite all the examples to the contrary. This is a lovely intersection for Arm in Africa. No one person, in my estimation, was ever the sole inspiration or the founder for Arm in Africa. No one person can be named as that person. Every single one of us in this room, we are all co-founders of Arm in Africa. We have all come together over the years and made a difference. We are the ones, all of us, and those that have gone on before us, who are truly the founders of Arm in Africa. The face of Arm in Africa is indeed Minsili, and the thousands like her, living in poverty and enriching us with a beautiful spirit. Trust me, I am not the poster boy for Arm in Africa. This young girl is. This young girl represents why we do anything at all. As Arm in Africa turns 23, I have come to realize, and I actually see Arm in Arm as more like a young adult. that is making all the right choices to empower a strong and positive future. I have lived through the adolescence, actually I have lived through the birth of Arm in Arm in Africa. I have lived through the adolescence of Arm in Arm in Africa, the teenage years, and now celebrating Arm in Arm in Africa as a young adult, making incredible changes in the world. St. Joan of Arc, I thank you. I thank you for your willingness to support and to co-parent Arm in Arm in Africa for the last 23 years. I and the board could not have done this without you. I am proud to co-parent this organization with you. Together, we have, and together we can continue to build a strong and lasting partnership in South Africa. Together, we have a most challenging goal, as I've mentioned, to meet. It kind of takes my breath away. From now, again, to the end of the calendar year, we have the opportunity to bring new meaning to what it means, the season of giving. I thank you again on behalf of Minsili and all the children of South Africa for your kindness. Thank you from the bottom of our collective hearts. Thank you.